The winter rain did not merely fall. It assaulted the western coast of England. It swept in from the Atlantic in great bruising sheets of silver and grey, hammering against the stone walls of Lindworth Park with a violence that suggested nature itself had a grievance against the house. Inside the east drawing-room, the sound was a dull, rhythmic thrumming, a heartbeat of water and wind that underscored the oppressive silence of the room. Lord Gabriel Harcourt, Marquess of Lindworth, stood before the fireplace. He was a man composed of sharp angles and rigid lines, his silhouette dark against the pale marble mantelpiece. At 36, Gabriel possessed the kind of face that painters might have found compelling and mothers found warning-worthy. Handsome, certainly, but with a harshness around the mouth and a coldness in the eyes that spoke of a soul boarded up and condemned. In his hand, he held a letter. The parchment was thick, expensive and cream-coloured, the handwriting upon it a spider scrawl of legal precision. It was a communication from his solicitor in London, Mr. Thaddeus Crouch, a man who possessed all the warmth of a ledger and the imagination of a stone. Gabriel stared into the grate where the fire had burned down to glowing embers and grey ash. He felt a grim kinship with the remnants. Once, there had been heat here. Once, 3 years ago, there had been a blaze that consumed everything. His pride, his name, his foolish, naive heart. Now there was only ash. A practical solution, Gabriel murmured to the empty room, his voice rough from disuse. He repeated the phrase, testing the weight of it. Practical. 3 years had passed since the scandal that had driven him from London society. 3 years since Lady Caroline, his wife of only 2 years, had stood in the centre of the Duchess of Richmond's ballroom and declared with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass that she could no longer endure the suffocating boredom of life with a man who preferred his botanical specimens to his wife's bed. She had left that very night with Lord Ashford, a man whose debts were as famous as his dimples, leaving Gabriel to face the whispering chorus of the ton alone. He had not fought for her. He had not challenged Ashford to a duel. He had simply turned his back on London, returned to his ancestral seat in Devon, and locked the gates. He had tended his mother's botanical gardens with a mechanical, obsessive precision, pruning away the dead wood, just as he had pruned away his own capacity for feeling. But the aristocracy was a beast that demanded to be fed, and the Marquessate of Lindworth required an heir. Gabriel lifted the letter again, his eyes tracking the dispassionate assessment of his future. "My lord, regarding the matter of the succession, I have, per your instructions, made discreet inquiries. You require a wife of good breeding, manageable temperament, and, crucially, one who understands the specific limitations of the arrangement you propose. Lord Pembridge, a frantic debtor but a man of old blood, has written on behalf of the Winters family of Hampshire. The family is in dire straits following the death of the patriarch. There are 2 daughters. The elder, Lady Montclair, is married and settled. The younger, Miss Dorothea Winters, is 22, unmarried despite 4 seasons, and is described by her own family as quiet, bookish, and of a plainness that precludes vanity. Lord Pembridge assures me that the young lady and her mother are in no position to negotiate terms. She will accept a marriage of convenience. She will not expect a love match. She brings no scandal, merely poverty and a lack of other prospects. She is, in short, eminently suitable for the practical purpose of securing the Lindworth line." Gabriel lowered the paper. Plain, bookish, desperate. It was perfect. A beautiful woman would expect adoration. A charming woman would expect society. A woman like Caroline would expect a husband who danced attendance upon her whims. But a plain, desperate woman? She would be grateful for the roof over her head and the title before her name. She would give him his heir, and in return, he would give her financial security and the one thing he craved most for himself: solitude. He moved to his desk, the heavy mahogany surface clear of everything save an inkwell and a quill. He dipped the pen, the scratch of the nib against the paper sounding startlingly loud in the quiet house. "Mr. Crouch, proceed with the arrangement. I accept the proposal regarding Miss Winters. Draw up the settlements immediately. The marriage will take place within the fortnight. There will be no ceremony, no guests, no celebration. She is to be brought to the chapel at St. Margaret's. I will meet her at the altar. Lindworth." He sanded the wet ink, his movements efficient and controlled. He did not wonder about Miss Dorothea Winters. He did not picture her face or wonder about her voice. She was not a person to him. She was a solution, a component in a transaction that would ensure the continuity of his name while leaving the fortress of his isolation intact. He rang the bell for the footman, his decision made. The letter was sealed with red wax and the crest of the Harcourt family, a hawk clutching a branch. As the servant took the letter and bowed, Gabriel turned back to the window. The rain was still falling, washing the world in grey. He pressed his hand against the cold glass, feeling the chill seep into his skin. "Do not fail me, Miss Winters," he whispered to the storm. "Be as invisible as they promise." 200 miles away, in the rolling green hills of Hampshire, the rain was gentler, but the atmosphere inside Winters' lodge was far more storm-laden. Miss Dorothea Winters sat in the window seat of what had once been her father's library, a heavy leather-bound volume resting on her knees. It was a treatise on celestial mechanics by Pierre-Simon Laplace, a book she had rescued from the pile destined for the auctioneer. She was reading the same paragraph for the 10th time, the words blurring before her eyes, unable to penetrate the wall of misery that had erected itself around her heart. The door to the library burst open, and peace fled. "There you are." Honoria's voice was a chime of bright, brittle bells. Her elder sister swept into the room, a vision in rose-colored silk that cost more than the annual wages of their entire household staff. Honoria, now Baroness Montclair, was everything Dorothea was not: vibrant, beautiful, demanding, and cruel. Honoria moved to the mirror above the fireplace, adjusting a curl of golden hair that had dared to come loose. "Mama has been looking for you everywhere. Lord Pembridge has sent word. The Marquess has accepted." Dorothea closed the book slowly, her fingers trembling against the leather cover. "He has?" "Of course he has," Honoria laughed, turning to face her sister with a look of triumphant pity. "I told you it would work. Men like Lindworth are predictable beasts. He needs a broodmare, and we offered him one that comes with no fuss and no price tag." "Honoria," Dorothea whispered, the hurt familiar but no less sharp. "Please." "Oh, do not look so tragic, Dot," Honoria said, using the childhood nickname she knew Dorothea detested. She walked over to the window seat, looming over her seated sister. "You should be thanking me on your knees. I have saved you. I have saved this family." "By selling me to a monster?" Dorothea asked, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. Honoria's eyes danced with malicious amusement. "A monster? Is that what they call him? The beast of Devon, the mad Marquess? Oh, likely he is just a boor. A sour, silent boor who will ignore you for 20 years while you sit in his draughty castle and knit socks. Is that not what you wanted? You always claim to prefer solitude to society." "I prefer peace," Dorothea corrected. "There is a difference." "Well, you shall have peace in abundance at Lindworth Park," Honoria said, turning away to inspect her fingernails. "They say no one has visited in 3 years, not since Lady Caroline ran off with Ashford. Imagine the gloom. It will be like living in a mausoleum." Dorothea looked out at the garden, where the winter frost had killed the last of the roses. "Why did you do it, Honoria? Really? You told Mama it was to save the family finances, but I saw you whispering with your friends at the assembly. I saw you laughing." Honoria stopped. She turned back slowly, and for a moment the mask of sisterly concern slipped entirely. "Because it is funny, Dorothea. Can you not see the delicious irony? The plainest girl in Hampshire, the one who can quote Latin but cannot flirt to save her life, married to the most elusive, broken man in England. It is a farce. My friends and I have a wager running. Mrs. Kellaway bets you will come running home within a month. I, however, have more faith in your stubbornness. I bet you will stay forever. You are too dutiful to leave and too proud to complain. You will rot there, Dorothea, just like the tapestries on the walls, and I shall win 50 guineas. Dorothea looked at her sister, really looked at her, seeing past the beauty to the hollow, bored creature beneath. "You are cruel, Honoria. I have always known it, but I never realized until now just how much you enjoy it." Honoria laughed again, a bright, meaningless sound, and swept out of the room, leaving the door open behind her. The draught from the hallway blew the pages of Dorothea's book, fluttering them like the wings of a trapped bird. Dorothea turned back to the window. The rain was falling harder now, blurring the world into a grey smudge. "I will not rot," she whispered to the glass, her voice trembling but fierce. "I will read. I will walk in the gardens. I will survive him. And I will survive you." The journey to Devon began 3 days later, under a sky the colour of a fresh bruise. The carriage that Gabriel had sent for her was black, bearing the Lindworth crest in silver on the door panel, a hawk clutching a thorny branch. It looked less like a wedding conveyance and more like a hearse. Dorothea sat inside, her trunk strapped to the roof, her hands encased in grey woolen gloves that did little to ward off the chill. Opposite her sat Lady Beatrice, who had insisted on accompanying her daughter to see her settled, though Dorothea suspected her mother merely wanted to ensure the Marquess did not change his mind at the last moment. Honoria sat beside their mother, wrapped in furs, looking out at the passing countryside with an expression of bored disdain. The journey was an exercise in endurance. The roads were rutted and muddy from the relentless winter rains, causing the carriage to lurch and sway violently. For 2 days, they travelled west, watching the landscape change from the gentle rolling hills of Hampshire to the wilder, craggier terrain of Devon. The trees here were gnarled and bent by the wind, the earth darker, the air sharper. They stopped for the night at a coaching inn near Exeter. The common room was crowded and smelled of ale and damp wool. When the innkeeper realized who the carriage belonged to, or rather whose crest it bore, his demeanour shifted from indifference to obsequious panic. "The Marquess of Lindworth's party. My humblest apologies, my lady. We shall clear the private parlour immediately. It seems your husband's name carries some weight at least," Honoria remarked, as they were ushered into a small, draughty room with a smoking fire, "though one wonders if it is respect or fear. Did you see the man's face? He looked as though we had brought a plague ship into his yard." "He is a Marquess," Lady Beatrice said nervously, warming her hands by the grate. "It is only natural that people should be respectful." "It was fear," Dorothea said quietly. She had seen it too. The way the stable boy had flinched when he saw the hawk crest. The way the serving girl had whispered to the cook. They were entering the territory of a man who was not merely a recluse, but a legend of darkness in his own county. That night, Dorothea lay awake in a strange bed, listening to the wind rattle the window pane. She thought of the man waiting for her. She tried to conjure a face from the gossip she had heard, a monster, a beast, a broken man. But all she could picture was the hawk on the carriage door. Sharp claws, sharp beak, a creature made to hunt and kill, not to nurture. "I will be invisible," she promised herself in the dark. "I will be so quiet he will forget I am there. I will be the ghost in his machine." They arrived at Lindworth Park late the following afternoon. The approach was dramatic, a long avenue lined with ancient oaks that met overhead, creating a tunnel of shadows even in the daylight. At the end of the tunnel, the house rose up like a cliff face. Greystone, castellated towers, and rows of tall, dark windows that reflected the storm clouds gathering above. It was magnificent, and it was terrifying. The carriage halted before the main entrance. Massive oak doors stood open, and a line of servants waited on the steps, their heads bowed against the wind. Dorothea stepped down, her legs stiff from travel, and felt the weight of the house press down on her. A woman in black bombazine stepped forward. She had a stern face softened by kind eyes. "Mrs. Daventry, my lady, housekeeper. Welcome to Lindworth Park." "Thank you," Dorothea said, her voice sounding thin in the open air. "His lordship is in the chapel," Mrs. Daventry said, her gaze flickering briefly to Honoria and Lady Beatrice with a hint of wariness. "He instructed that the ceremony should take place immediately upon your arrival. The vicar is waiting." "Immediately?" Lady Beatrice fluttered. "But surely—" "We must change our dress, refresh ourselves." "His lordship was quite specific," Mrs. Daventry said, her tone polite but immovable. "He wishes the matter concluded before nightfall." "How romantic," Honoria drawled, adjusting her bonnet. "He cannot wait to claim his bride, or perhaps he simply wants to get the unpleasantness over with like pulling a tooth." Dorothea felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. "I am ready," she said. She did not want to change. She did not want to prolong the anticipation. If she was to be sacrificed, let it be done while she still had the courage to stand upright. They walked to the chapel, a small medieval structure of dark flint standing at the edge of the estate, separated from the main house by a windswept lawn. The interior was cold, smelling of old incense and damp stone. It was lit only by candles on the altar, their flames dancing in the draught. And there, standing with his back to them, was the Marquess. He turned as they entered. He was taller than Dorothea had expected. He wore black, stark and unrelieved, which made the pallor of his face and the darkness of his hair seem even more pronounced. He was not ugly. Honoria's taunts of a beast were unfounded. In fact, he possessed a severe classical beauty, like a statue carved from granite. But his eyes were the color of a winter sea, grey and turbulent and utterly terrifyingly cold. He did not smile. He did not bow. He simply watched Dorothea walk down the short aisle towards him, his gaze dissecting her. He looked at her not as a woman, but as a component, a necessary acquisition. He noted her height, her plain grey dress, her pale face, and seemingly dismissed them all as adequate for his purpose. "My lord," Lady Beatrice whispered when they reached the altar, curtsying deeply. Gabriel ignored her. His attention was fixed entirely on Dorothea. "Miss Winters," he said. His voice was deep, a baritone that vibrated in the stone space. "Lord Harcourt," she replied. She lifted her chin, refusing to look away, though every instinct screamed at her to run. "Shall we begin?" He gestured to the nervous-looking vicar, who stood waiting with the prayer book. The ceremony was a blur of ancient words spoken in a hollow void. Dorothea repeated the vows automatically: to love, cherish, and to obey. The words felt like lies tasting of ash. Gabriel spoke his vows with the precise, clipped diction of a man reading a legal contract. There was no emotion, no hesitation, merely the execution of a duty. When the time came for the ring, Gabriel reached out and took her hand. His skin was cold, but dry. As he slid the heavy gold band onto her finger, Dorothea felt a tremor run through his hand. It was slight, barely a vibration, but for a second his fingers tightened around hers, gripping hard, as if he were steadying himself on the edge of a precipice. She looked up at him, startled. For a fleeting instant, the grey ice of his eyes seemed to crack, revealing something raw and agonizingly human beneath. A flash of panic, of regret. Then it was gone. The mask slammed back into place. He released her hand as if it burned him. "I pronounce you man and wife," the vicar stammered. Gabriel did not kiss her. He did not even look at her again. He turned on his heel and walked into the vestry to sign the register, his black coat swirling around him like a shroud. "Well," Honoria whispered loudly, leaning close to Dorothea's ear. "That was cheerful. I have seen funerals with more joy. Welcome to your new life, sister dear. Do try not to freeze to death before you produce the heir." That evening, the silence of Lindworth Park seemed to press against the doors of the Marchioness's chambers. Dorothea sat by the fire, still dressed in her grey silk, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had been prepared for this duty. She knew what was expected of a wife, particularly one purchased for the sake of an heir. A heavy knock sounded at the connecting door. Dorothea stood, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Come in," she whispered, though she knew he could not hear her. She cleared her throat and spoke louder. "Enter." The door did not open. Instead, Gabriel's voice came through the heavy oak, deep and muffled. "I shall not disturb you tonight, Dorothea. You have had a long journey and a trying day. The servants have been instructed that you are not to be woken until you ring." She stared at the wood, stunned by the reprieve. "My lord." "Sleep well," he said, his voice rougher now. "You are safe here, from the world, and from me." She heard his footsteps retreating, leaving her alone with the dying fire and a confusion that felt strangely like gratitude. The wedding breakfast the following morning was a farce of hospitality. It was held in the family dining room, a space of dark wood and heavy velvet drapes that seemed designed to absorb all light and sound. Gabriel sat at the head of the table, silent and imposing. Dorothea sat at his right hand, staring at a plate of eggs she could not swallow. Lady Beatrice chattered nervously about the weather, about the roads, about anything to fill the suffocating silence. And then the doors opened. It was not a servant. It was Honoria, sweeping in like a queen claiming her throne, wearing a gown of celestial blue silk that was shockingly bright in the gloomy room. But she was not alone. Behind her walked her husband, Baron Montclair, and 3 other couples, friends from London, people Dorothea recognized as the elite, cruel circle Honoria courted. "Good morning," Honoria announced, her voice ringing out. "We met the Hamiltons and the Greys on the road, can you imagine? They were traveling to Bath, and I insisted, absolutely insisted, that they stop to wish the happy couple joy." The guests crowded into the room, a flurry of expensive fabrics and loud voices, bringing the scent of damp wool and artificial perfume. They looked around with hungry, curious eyes, taking in the dark room, the silent Marquess, the plain bride. Gabriel slowly lowered his fork. The sound of silver clicking against china was soft, yet it silenced the room instantly. "Lady Montclair," Gabriel said. He did not raise his voice, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You were not given leave to invite guests." "Oh, come now, my lord," Honoria laughed, waving a hand dismissively. She took a seat without being asked. "One cannot have a wedding without a celebration. It is practically illegal. Besides, I felt a responsibility. It was my idea, after all." One of the women, a sharp-faced creature in emerald green, tittered behind her hand. "Honoria has been telling us the most delightful story, Lord Lindworth, about how this match came to be. It is quite the romance." "Is it?" Gabriel asked. His eyes were fixed on Honoria. "Pray, tell us the story, Lady Montclair. I am captivated." Honoria smiled, the smile of a cat with a mouse between its paws. She looked at Dorothea, and her eyes glittered with malice. "It is a story of practicality, my lord. We all knew poor Dorothea was struggling. 4 seasons, no proposals, a burden on the family finances. And you, well, everyone knows of your seclusion, your need for a quiet arrangement. It seemed the perfect solution. The unmarriageable spinster and the man who wants no wife. I merely suggested to Lord Pembridge that he connect 2 people who had run out of other options." "2 desperate souls," the woman in green murmured, loud enough to be heard. "How charitable of you, Honoria." "Indeed," Honoria agreed. "I thought, why not? Why not let them save each other? He gets his heir, she gets a roof over her head, and society is spared the sight of another season of poor Dorothea standing by the wall." Dorothea felt the blood drain from her face. She stared at the tablecloth, wishing the floor would open and swallow her whole. The humiliation was absolute. To be discussed like a piece of damaged furniture, in front of her husband, in her own home. "So you see," Honoria finished, lifting a glass of wine she had poured for herself, "it was a jest in a way, a cosmic joke that turned into a marriage. To the happy couple, the beast and the mouse." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Dorothea gripped her napkin, her knuckles white, waiting for the laughter, waiting for Gabriel to nod, to agree, to dismiss her. The chair legs scraped loudly against the floor. Gabriel stood up. He did not look like a recluse now. He looked like a king whose borders had been breached. He towered over the table, his shoulders broad, his face set in a mask of terrifying calm. He walked slowly around the table until he stood behind Dorothea's chair. "A jest," Gabriel repeated softly. "A figure of speech, my lord," Honoria said, though her smile faltered slightly. "No," Gabriel said. "I think not." He placed a hand on Dorothea's shoulder. His touch was heavy, warm, solid, a claim, a shield. "You came here, Lady Montclair, to my house, to laugh at your sister. You brought your friends to gawp at us as if we were animals in a menagerie. You believe you have orchestrated a great comedy." His grip on Dorothea's shoulder tightened, not in anger, but in reassurance. "You call your sister plain," Gabriel continued, his voice rising in power, filling the room. "You call her unmarriageable. You call her a burden. You look at her through the lens of your own vanity and see nothing. He looked down at Dorothea. For the first time, his eyes were not cold. They were burning with a fierce, protective indignation. "But you are wrong," Gabriel said. "You are fundamentally, catastrophically wrong. In the brief time I have known her, Miss Winters, Lady Lindworth, has shown more dignity in her little finger than you possess in your entire being. She walked into this house, into a marriage with a stranger, with her head high and her spirit unbroken. She has faced your cruelty with silence, which you mistake for weakness but which I recognize as grace." He looked back at Honoria, and his expression was withering. "You speak of value. You speak of worth. You are a gilded shell, Lady Montclair. Pretty to look at and utterly empty inside. My wife is a woman of substance. She is quiet because she thinks before she speaks. She is solitary because she finds no comfort in the shallow noise you call conversation. You offered her to me as a joke. Then I thank you. For you have accidentally given me the only thing of value this family has ever produced." Honoria's mouth fell open. Her face turned a patchy red. The friend she had brought shifted uncomfortably, avoiding Gabriel's gaze. "Gabriel," Dorothea whispered, shocked to her core. "My lord," Baron Montclair blustered, standing up, "this is uncalled for." "Get out," Gabriel said. He did not shout. He did not need to. The command cracked like a whip. "All of you. You are not welcome in my home. You will leave now. If you are not off my land in 20 minutes, I will have the dogs released." "You cannot be serious," Honoria gasped. "I have never been more serious in my life," Gabriel said. "Go. Take your laughter and your cruelty back to London. This house is a place of silence, perhaps, but it will no longer be a place of mockery." There was a scramble of movement. Chairs were pushed back, cloaks gathered. The humiliation had turned. The predators had become the prey. Within moments, the room was emptying. Honoria paused at the door, shooting one last look of venom at Dorothea. "You will regret this," she hissed. "He is defending his pride, not you. Do not mistake it for affection." Then she was gone. The front door slammed, echoing through the vast house. The sound of carriage wheels crunching on gravel faded into the distance. Silence returned to the dining room. But it was different now. It was not the heavy, oppressive silence of before. It was the silence of a storm that had broken. Dorothea sat frozen, her hand shaking where it rested on the table. Gabriel was still standing behind her, his hand still on her shoulder. Slowly he removed it and walked to the window, staring out at the grey sky. "My lord," Dorothea said. Her voice was barely audible. "Thank you." Gabriel did not turn. His shoulders were rigid, as if the outburst had cost him a great deal of energy. "Do not thank me. I did not do it for your gratitude. I did it because I will not tolerate disrespect in my own house." "Even so," she said, rising from her chair. "You called me a woman of substance. No one has ever said such a thing of me." He turned then. His face was composed again, the mask back in place, but his eyes were weary. "It was the truth, Dorothea. Whatever else this marriage is, a contract, a duty, a convenience, it will be based on truth. I will not lie to you, and I will not allow others to lie about you." He walked towards the door, pausing as he passed her. He looked down, and for a second he seemed about to reach out to touch her hand. But he stopped himself. He clasped his hands behind his back, withdrawing into his fortress. "Mrs. Daventry will show you the layout of the house. As I wrote to you, you have the freedom of the library and the conservatory. I ask only that you respect my privacy in the West Wing. That is my retreat." "I understand," Dorothea said. "Good." He nodded once, stiffly. "We shall dine at 7. Until then you are at liberty." He left her there, amidst the remains of the uneaten breakfast. Dorothea let out a breath she felt she had been holding for days. She was alone again. But as she touched her shoulder where his hand had rested, she realized something had changed. He was not a monster. He was a man in pain, a man who built walls of ice to keep the world out. But he had stepped out from behind those walls to defend her. "The conservatory," she whispered to herself, remembering his letter. "I shall start there." The conservatory at Lindworth Park was a revelation. It was a cathedral of glass and iron, attached to the south side of the house. sheltering a world of green from the English winter. When Dorothea stepped inside an hour later, the air was warm and humid, smelling of damp earth, moss, and the sweet, heavy perfume of jasmine. It was a shock to the senses after the cold stone of the house. Palm trees reached for the high glass roof. Ferns uncurled their fronds like waking lovers. There were orchids in shades of violet and spotted gold hanging from mossy baskets. It was a paradise, and it was clearly loved. Every leaf was glossy, every pot free of weeds. She walked slowly down the central path, her fingers brushing the leaves of a lemon tree. She felt peace settle over her for the first time in weeks. Here, amidst the silent, breathing life of plants, she made sense. She found a small writing desk tucked away in a corner, hidden behind a screen of bamboo. On it lay a ledger, a stack of sketching paper, and several pencils. It was Gabriel's workspace. She hesitated, knowing she should not intrude, but on the desk sat a small potted plant that seemed out of place. It was a hellebore, its white flowers drooping, its leaves yellowing at the edges. Dorothea frowned. She touched the soil. It was damp, too damp. She looked up at the glass roof. The plant sat directly under a pane that was slightly darker than the others, likely providing shade in summer but gloom in winter. "You are drowning," she murmured to the plant, "and you are cold." Without thinking, she picked up the pot. She moved it to a stand near the south-facing wall, where the weak winter sun was pooling on the stone floor. She propped up a drooping stem with a small twig she found on the ground. Then, feeling bold, she took a piece of paper from the desk. She wrote a single line. "Helleborus niger prefers well-drained soil and dappled light, not deep shadow. It cannot bloom if it is drowning." She left the note on the desk, weighing it down with a pebble. When she returned to her room, her heart was beating fast. She had dared to speak to him in the only language that seemed to matter here. The next morning, Dorothea went to the conservatory before breakfast. The hellebore was where she had left it, but the soil had been aerated, and the pot raised on clay feet to improve drainage. On the desk, her note was gone. In its place was a sheet of heavy cream paper. "You have a keen eye. I had mistaken its lethargy for dormancy. It seems even plants require a change of perspective to survive." Beneath the words, he had sketched the flower. It was a technical drawing, precise and architectural, showing the veins of the petals and the structure of the stamen. But at the bottom, he had written, "Thank you." Dorothea smiled. It was a small, fragile thing, that smile. But it was real. 2 days later, she found a new note waiting for her. "The dendrobium orchid near the fountain is about to flower. It blooms only once every 3 years, and the scent is said to change from morning to evening. I would value your observation." Dorothea spent the morning by the fountain. She sketched the orchid as the buds unfurled, noting the pale lavender of the petals. She wrote her observations on the back of the sketch. Morning scent, citrus and green apple. Evening expectation, vanilla. She left the sketch for him. The next day, a reply. "Evening scent confirmed as vanilla, with a trace of clove. Your sketch captures the asymmetry of the petals perfectly. Most illustrators try to make nature symmetrical, which is a lie. You draw the truth." Thus began a silent paper courtship. They did not speak of it at dinner. Their meals were polite, quiet affairs where they discussed the weather or the estate management. Gabriel remained distant, retreating to his study immediately after eating. But in the conservatory, amidst the greenery, they were speaking volumes. They exchanged notes on soil acidity, on the pruning of roses, on the strange habits of carnivorous plants. But between the lines of botanical Latin, other things were being said. "This fern is resilient," she wrote. "It survives even when neglected." "Resilience is often mistaken for hardness," he replied. "Perhaps it simply waits for the right conditions to soften." "The cactus uses its thorns to protect its water," he wrote. "It assumes everything that approaches is a thief." "Perhaps," she answered. "It has simply never been offered water freely, and thus does not know how to receive it." Weeks turned into a month. The winter deepened, snow covering the grounds of Lindworth Park in a blanket of white silence. But inside the house, a thaw was beginning. One evening in late January, Dorothea was in the library searching for a book on alpine flora. She was on a ladder stretching for a volume on the top shelf when the ladder shifted on the polished floor. She gasped, clutching the shelf, the ladder wobbling dangerously beneath her. Strong hands gripped her waist. "I have you." Gabriel's voice was right beside her ear. He lifted her down as easily as if she were a doll, setting her feet on the floor. He did not release her immediately. For a moment, she was pressed against the front of his coat, smelling the scent of him, soap, old paper, and the crisp smell of the winter air. She looked up. He was looking down at her, and the grey eyes were dark, the pupils blown wide. The distance that usually separated them had vanished. "Dorothea," he breathed. It was the first time he had said her name without a title since the wedding breakfast. The book," she stammered, breathless. "I could not reach." "You should have asked," he said. His voice was rough. "You do not have to do everything alone, not anymore." He reached up, one hand still on her waist, to steady her, and plucked the book from the shelf with his free hand. He handed it to her. Their fingers brushed, and the contact sent a jolt through her that was sharper than static. Gabriel pulled his hand back, stepping away as if he had broken a rule. The mask slid back into place, but it was thinner now. "Be careful," he said hoarsely. "The floors are slippery." "Gabriel," she said, finding her courage. "The notes in the conservatory." He paused, half turned away. "Yes? They mean a great deal to me. I have never had anyone to share my thoughts with. My family. They thought my interests were foolish." Gabriel turned back to her. His expression was intense. "Your family were fools, Dorothea. I think I have made my opinion on that clear. Your mind is—" He searched for the word. "It is a rare landscape. I enjoy exploring it." He bowed abruptly and left the room, leaving Dorothea clutching the book to her chest, her heart singing a song she had never thought to hear. The crisis came in February. It arrived not with a shout, but with a cough. Gabriel had been out on the estate, supervising the repair of a tenant's roof in the freezing rain. He had returned soaked to the bone, shivering, but had refused to stop working, retreating to his study with a bottle of brandy. By the next morning, the house was silent in a different way. The servants were whispering. Mrs. Daventry met Dorothea at the bottom of the stairs, her face pale. "It is the fever, my lady. His lordship cannot wake. He is burning up." Dorothea felt a cold hand clutch her heart. She ran up the stairs, ignoring the housekeeper's protests that she should not expose herself to infection. She burst into Gabriel's chaotic bedroom in the west wing, a room she had never entered. It was sparse, monk-like. The only luxury was the heavy velvet curtains, now drawn against the day. Gabriel lay in the center of the great bed, his face flushed with an unnatural heat, his breathing ragged and shallow. He was thrashing, muttering names in his delirium. "Caroline," he moaned. Why? Dorothea flinched, but she stepped forward. She placed her hand on his forehead. It was burning. "Get cold water," she ordered the maid who was cowering in the corner, "and clean linens, and fetch my sketchbook from the conservatory, the one with the notes on herbal remedies. Quickly." For 3 days and 3 nights, Dorothea did not leave his side. She waged war against the fever. She bathed his face with cool water. She forced willow bark tea between his cracked lips. She held him down when the nightmares came. She learned his demons in those dark hours. She heard him beg for forgiveness, heard him shout at the ghosts of his past. She heard the depth of his loneliness, the belief that he was unlovable, broken, discarded. "I am here," she whispered to him, stroking his damp hair. "I am here, Gabriel. You are not alone. I will not leave you." On the 4th morning, the fever broke. Dorothea had fallen asleep in the chair beside the bed, her head resting on the mattress, her hand clutching his. She woke to the feeling of movement. She lifted her head. Gabriel was looking at her. His eyes were clear, though exhausted. He was looking at their joined hands. "Dorothea." His voice was a ruined croak. "You are awake," she breathed, tears springing to her eyes. "Thank God." "You stayed," he said, as if stating a miracle. "I heard you. In the dark. You stayed." "Of course I stayed," she said. You are my husband." "No," he whispered. He moved his thumb, stroking the back of her hand. "It is more than that. Caroline left when I was merely boring. You stayed when I was dying. Why?" "Because," Dorothea said, and the truth tumbled out of her, simple and undeniable. "Because you see me. Because you defended me. Because you know that hellebores need drainage and that I need books. Because—" She looked down. "Because I think I have loved you since the moment you told my sister to get out." Gabriel closed his eyes. A tear leaked out, tracking through the stubble on his cheek. "I thought my life was over," he whispered. "I thought I was ash. But you are the rain that wakes the seed." He opened his eyes and looked at her with a vulnerability that broke her heart and healed it all at once. "I am not a whole man, Dorothea. I have sharp edges, I have shadows, but what is left of me, it belongs to you. If you will have it." Dorothea leaned forward and pressed her lips to his forehead, then gently to his lips. "I will have all of it," she promised. "The shadows and the light." The fever retreated slowly, like a tide withdrawing from the shore, leaving Gabriel weak but lucid. The days of his convalescence became a time of strange, suspended grace at Lindworth Park. The winter began to loosen its grip on the estate, the relentless grey rain giving way to pale, watery sunshine that slanted through the mullioned windows of the West Wing. For the first time in 3 years, the doors to the master's chambers were not locked. Dorothea moved between her own rooms and his, with a quiet propriety that fooled the servants, but deceived neither herself nor her husband. She read to him as he regained his strength, passages from the botanical journals he loved, poetry by Wordsworth, and occasionally, daringly, the philosophical treatises they had discussed in the library. One afternoon, a week after the fever broke, Gabriel sat in the armchair by the window, a blanket draped over his legs. He was watching her as she poured tea from a silver service, the sunlight catching the stray hairs that had escaped her cap. "You look tired," he said. His voice had lost the rasp of illness, but retained a new gravelly depth. Dorothea paused, the teapot suspended. "I am quite well, my lord." "Gabriel," he corrected gently. "You called me Gabriel when I was dying. I should like you to continue now that I intend to live." A flush rose on her neck. "Gabriel, then, and I am not tired, I am content. Content to be a nursemaid to an invalid. Content to be useful," she said, handing him the cup. Their fingers brushed, a deliberate contact that lasted a second longer than necessary. "And content to be in a room where I am not invisible." Gabriel took the tea but did not drink. He held the saucer, looking out at the rolling lawns where the frost was melting. "I have wasted so much time," he murmured. "I built a fortress to keep pain out, Dorothea, but I forgot that walls keep light out as well. I have been living in the dark for 3 years. The hellebore blooms in the dark," she reminded him softly, sitting on the ottoman near his chair. "But even it reaches for the sun when spring comes." He looked down at her, his expression intense. "Spring is coming. I want to show it to you. Not just the conservatory, but the estate, the land. There is a lake to the north and a folly on the hill where one can see the sea on a clear day. Will you walk with me, when I am able?" "I would like that very much," she said. The physical distance between them eroded not with a dramatic crash, but with the slow, steady certainty of a glacier moving. It was in the way he leaned into her touch when she adjusted his pillows, in the way he refused to let the maid read his correspondence, insisting only Dorothea had the patience for his scrawl. And it was in the way he looked at her when he thought she was not noticing, a look of hunger, yes, but also of profound, bewildered gratitude. By mid-March, Gabriel was well enough to dine downstairs. The first dinner they shared in the main dining room felt like a victory. He wore formal evening dress, though his coat hung a little looser on his frame than before. Dorothea wore the green wool dress he had admired, wearing the amethyst brooch he had given her, a family heirloom presented without fanfare on a Tuesday morning. After dinner, he did not retreat to his study. "The sky is clear tonight," he said, standing by the French doors that led to the terrace. "Exceptionally clear." Dorothea looked up from her embroidery. "Is it?" "I have a telescope," he said, turning to her. "On the roof of the tower. I used to spend hours there before. I have not been up there in years, but I remembered that you mentioned an interest in the moons of Jupiter." Dorothea set her needlework aside, her heart beating a jagged rhythm. "I have read of them. I have never seen them." "Come," he said, holding out his hand. She took it. The climb to the tower was steep, winding up a narrow stone staircase that smelled of dust and cold air. Gabriel went first, holding the lantern, his grip on her hand firm and warm. When they emerged onto the leads of the roof, the wind whipped at Dorothea's skirts, but the sight above stole the breath from her lungs. The sky was a vast, inverted bowl of velvet, dusted with diamonds. Without the smoke of London or the lights of a town to dim them, the stars blazed with a ferocity that felt almost auditory, a silent symphony of light. The Milky Way was a bruised smear of silver arching overhead. "Oh," Dorothea breathed, clutching Gabriel's arm. "Oh, it is too much." "It is exactly enough," Gabriel said. He led her to the heavy brass telescope mounted on a swivel stand. He adjusted the focus with practiced hands, the brass clicking softly in the quiet. "Here. Look." Dorothea leaned forward, closing one eye, peering through the lens. At first she saw only blur, but then Gabriel's hand covered hers on the dial, making a microscopic adjustment, and suddenly, there it was, a sphere of banded pearl hanging in the darkness, flanked by 4 tiny pinpricks of light. "Jupiter," she whispered, "and the Galilean moons, Io, Europa, Ganymede, Callisto." "You know their names," he said, his voice close to her ear. He was standing behind her, his chest pressing lightly against her back to shield her from the wind. "I know them from books. It is different to see them, to know they are real." She straightened, turning in the circle of his arms to face him. The starlight turned the planes of his face to silver and shadow. "Thank you, Gabriel, for giving me the stars." "I would give you the universe if I could," he said roughly. "But I can only offer you this. My name, my house, and a heart that I thought was dead, but which beats only for you." The wind tore at them cold and sharp, but Dorothea felt hot. "That is all I want. I do not need the universe. I only need to be seen by the one person who matters." Gabriel made a sound, half groan, half prayer, and lowered his head. This time, when he kissed her, it was not the chaste, promising press of lips in the sick room. It was deep, hungry, and desperate. It tasted of the cold night air and the heat of a man who had been starving for years. His hands came up to cup her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones as if checking she was real, while Dorothea clung to the lapels of his coat, anchoring herself against the vertiginous spin of the earth. He pulled back breathlessly, resting his forehead against hers. "Dorothea, I cannot be a monk any longer. Not with you." "I do not want a monk," she whispered, her hands sliding up to tangle in the dark hair at the nape of his neck. "I want my husband." He swept her up into his arms, carrying her down the winding stairs, through the silent corridors of the house that had been a mausoleum, and was now finally waking up. That night in the great bed in the West Wing, there was no darkness. Gabriel lit every candle in the room. "I want to see you," he told her, his voice raw as he unfastened the buttons of her dress with hands that trembled with restraint. "I want to see every part of you. I want no shadows between us." And when he finally laid her bare, he did not look at her with the critical, assessing gaze of society, nor the dismissive glance of her family. He looked at her with reverence. He traced the curve of her hip and the line of her throat, as if she were the rarest orchid in his collection. "Beautiful," he murmured against her skin. "You are exquisite." Dorothea, who had spent 22 years believing she was plain, believing she was a grey moth in a world of butterflies, finally saw herself through his prism. In his eyes, in his touch, she was not plain. She was beloved, and that made her radiant. Spring exploded across Devon with a riot of green. The rain still fell, but it was the soft, nurturing rain of April, coaxing life from the soil. Life at Lindworth Park settled into a rhythm of profound happiness. Gabriel and Dorothea were rarely apart. They worked together in the conservatory in the mornings, rode across the estate in the afternoons, and read together in the library in the evenings. The servants, taking their cue from their master, relaxed. The house felt lighter, the curtains threw back to let the sun in. It was during one of their morning sessions in the conservatory that the idea for the circle was born. Dorothea was sketching a new specimen of fern when she noticed the young maid Alice lingering by the door with a dustcloth, craning her neck to see the drawing. "Come in, Alice," Dorothea called out. "Do you wish to see?" Alice blushed and stepped forward. "I beg your pardon, my lady. I didn't mean to stare, it's just, I've never seen a drawing like that. It looks like it's breathing." "It is a Polystichum setiferum," Dorothea explained, showing her the frond. "See how the leaves unfurl? It follows a mathematical pattern." Alice looked at the plant, then at the drawing. "I didn't know plants had math in them, my lady. I thought they just grew." "Everything has a pattern," Gabriel said, emerging from behind a palm, "if you know how to look." Alice looked between them, her curiosity overcoming her deference. I can't read, my lady, but I always liked the flowers. My grandmother taught me which ones heal a cut and which ones make a tea for sleeping." Dorothea looked at Gabriel. A silent communication passed between them, a spark of an idea. "Alice," Dorothea said slowly, "if I were to teach you, not just the names, but how to draw them, and perhaps how to read the names in the books." Alice's eyes went wide. "Me, my lady? But I'm just a maid." "Intelligence does not care about station," Gabriel said firmly. "Only opportunity does, and opportunity is something we can provide." By the end of the week, Alice was joined by Mrs. Daventry's niece and the daughter of the gamekeeper. They met in the conservatory on Tuesday afternoons. It began simply, Dorothea showing them the structure of flowers, Gabriel explaining the Latin taxonomy, but soon it became something more. It became a sanctuary, a place where young women who had been told their only value lay in scrubbing floors or mending sheets were told that their minds were capable of understanding the complexities of the natural world. It was unconventional. It was, by the standards of the ton, dangerously eccentric, but Dorothea had never felt more purposeful. However, the world outside the gates of Lindworth Park had not forgotten them. And peace, no matter how hard won, is rarely left undisturbed for long. It arrived in May, in a carriage that rattled up the drive with an urgency that scattered the rooks from the trees. Gabriel and Dorothea were in the rose garden, Gabriel pruning a stubborn climber, while Dorothea collected the cuttings in a basket. They heard the wheels on the gravel and exchanged a look of apprehension. They were expecting no one. A footman came running across the lawn. "My lord, my lady, visitors." "Who is it?" Gabriel asked, wiping his hands on a cloth, his posture stiffening. "It is the Baron and Baroness Montclair, my lord, and they seem distressed." Dorothea felt a chill that had nothing to do with the spring breeze. "Honoria." "Send them away," Gabriel said instantly, his face darkening. "I gave orders." "Wait," Dorothea said, placing a hand on his arm. "If she has come back, after what you said, she must be desperate. Curiosity is one thing, Gabriel, but Honoria is proud. She would not return to the scene of her humiliation unless she had no choice." Gabriel looked at her, his jaw set. "You are too kind, Dorothea. It will be your undoing." "It is not kindness," she said, her voice steady. "It is resilience. I am not the frightened mouse she left behind. Let us see what she wants. We are strong enough to face her now." Gabriel studied her face, seeing the quiet steel in her grey eyes. He nodded, taking her hand and placing it on his arm. "Very well, but if she says one word out of turn, I will not be answerable for my actions." They walked back to the house together, a united front against the encroaching past. In the drawing room, the scene was very different from Honoria's last visit. There was no swagger, no entourage of tittering friends. Baron Montclair was pacing the rug, looking haggard and grey. Honoria sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands twisting a lace handkerchief into ruins. She looked thinner, her beauty sharp and brittle, like glass on the verge of shattering. When Gabriel and Dorothea entered, Montclair stopped pacing. Honoria looked up, and for the first time in her life, Dorothea saw fear in her sister's eyes. "What do you want?" Gabriel asked, skipping all pleasantries. He did not offer them a seat. "Lord Lindworth," Montclair began, his voice shaking, We come to you in a time of great difficulty." "You came to me in a time of difficulty 6 months ago," Gabriel said coldly, "and used it as an opportunity to mock my wife. Why should I listen to you now?" "Because we are ruined," Honoria whispered. The words seemed to be dragged out of her. She stood up, her movements jerky. "We are ruined, Dorothea, totally, irrevocably." "Gambling?" Gabriel asked, looking at Montclair with disgust. The Baron looked at the floor. "Investments. Bad ones. And yes, the tables, the creditors are circling. They are going to take Montclair House. They are going to take everything. We will be on the street within the week. And you come to me," Gabriel said, "expecting... what? Money. You think I will empty my coffers to save the man who laughed at my marriage?" "We have nowhere else to go," Honoria cried out, stepping forward. "Mother cannot take us in. She has barely enough for herself. You are family, Dorothea. You cannot let us fall into the gutter." Dorothea looked at her sister. She remembered the taunts in the library. "You will rot there, 2 unwanted creatures." She remembered the cruelty at the wedding breakfast, but she also saw the terror of a woman who had built her entire identity on status and was watching it crumble. "You called me a burden," Dorothea said quietly. "You said I was an embarrassment. You sold me to Gabriel as a joke because you thought it would be funny to see me suffer." "I know," Honoria sobbed. The tears reeled this time, carving tracks through her powder. "I know I was cruel. I was jealous, Dot. I was always jealous." Dorothea blinked. "Jealous? You were the beauty, the diamond." "And that is all I was," Honoria shouted, her voice cracking. "I had to be beautiful because I had nothing else. You had your books. You had your mind. You didn't care what people thought, not really. I lived for their approval, and now they are laughing at me. The same people I tried to impress are laughing because I have lost everything." She sank back onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. "I am nothing without the title. I am nothing." The room was silent, save for Honoria's weeping. Gabriel looked down at her with no pity, only a cool detachment. "I will not give you money," Gabriel said. Montclair made a sound of despair. "However," Gabriel continued, his voice hard, "I will not have it said that my wife's sister is living in a workhouse. It reflects poorly on Lindworth. I will purchase your debts." Montclair's head snapped up. You will?" "I will become your sole creditor," Gabriel said, "which means you will answer to me. You will retreat to your country estate in Yorkshire, which I believe is unentailed and small but livable. You will live there quietly. You will not come to London. You will not attend the season. You will work to repay me, however slowly. If you set foot in a gambling hell again, Montclair, I will foreclose on you so fast your head will spin." "Yorkshire," Honoria whispered, looking up. "But that is exile. It is the end of the world." "It is a roof over your head," Dorothea said, stepping forward. She looked down at her sister, not with triumph, but with a calm authority. "It is more than you offered me, Honoria. You offered me a prison. We are offering you a sanctuary. Whether you view it as a prison or a home depends entirely on which prism you choose to look through." Honoria stared at her. She looked at the plain sister she had mocked, seeing the amethysts at her throat, the fine wool of her dress, and unmistakably the protective hand Gabriel kept on the small of her back. She saw a woman who was loved, a woman who had power. Honoria slumped. The fight went out of her. "Yorkshire," she murmured. "Very well. We accept." "Good," Gabriel said. "My solicitor will draw up the papers. Now get out." The exit was less dramatic than the last time, but far more final. Montclair looked like a beaten dog. Honoria looked like a ghost. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back at Dorothea. "You won," Honoria said softly. "The joke was on me, after all. You got the fairy tale, and I got the tragedy." "It is not a fairy tale," Dorothea replied. "It is real life. And it is work. I hope you learn to do it." When the door closed, the silence in the room was heavy but clean. Gabriel turned to Dorothea. "Was I too harsh?" "No," she said. She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. You were just, and you were merciful. Yorkshire will be good for her. It is bracing, Gabriel chuckled, the sound rumbling in his chest. He turned her in his arms, lifting her chin to look into her eyes. You amaze me, Dorothea. You meet malice with wisdom. You meet ruin with grace. Every day I discover some new facet of you. And every day, she whispered, I am grateful you are the one holding the prism. I have been thinking, Gabriel said, his expression turning serious. About the circle. About Alice and the others. Yes? You said they need to catalogue specimens for the Royal Society. I have friends in London, scientists, botanists, who stopped writing to me when I withdrew. Perhaps it is time I wrote back. Perhaps it is time Lindworth Park became known for something other than scandal. Dorothea's eyes shone. You would do that? Re-enter the world? I am not afraid of the world anymore, Gabriel said, kissing her forehead, because I no longer face it alone. Let us build something here, Dorothea. Let us make this house a center of learning. Let us show them that the plain sister and the mad Marquess have created something more beautiful than they could ever imagine. Yes, she said, her heart overflowing. Oh, yes. And so the seasons turned. Summer brought heat that made the conservatory steam and the rose gardens explode in color. The circle grew from 3 students to 10, then 12. Local girls, daughters of tenants. Even a few gentlewomen of reduced means from the village who had heard rumors of the strange scholarly Marchioness. Gabriel wrote his letters. Slowly, tentatively, the scientific community responded. At first out of curiosity, then out of respect for the meticulous data and illustrations that began to flow from Devon. They did not know at first that the illustrations were drawn by a woman or that the data was compiled by maids. They only knew the work was brilliant. Autumn brought golden light and crisp mornings. It also brought a new quietness to Dorothea, a subtle inward turning that Gabriel, with his observer's eye, noted immediately. One evening in October, as they sat by the fire in the library, Gabriel lowered his book. You are sketching the hellebore again, he noted. Dorothea looked down at her pad. She was indeed drawing the winter rose, the flower that bloomed in the dark. It seems appropriate, she said. Why? She put the pencil down. She stood and walked over to him, taking his hands. Because, Gabriel, the hellebore is a sign of life in the depth of winter. It is a promise of continuity. She placed his hand on her stomach, which was still flat beneath her gown. I believe, she said, her voice trembling with joy, that we have secured the succession. Gabriel went still. He stared at his hand, then up at her face. The grey eyes that had once been storm clouds filled with a sudden overwhelming light. He fell to his knees before her, burying his face in her skirts, his shoulders shaking. Dorothea, he whispered, my salvation. She stroked his hair, smiling down at him. The joke was over. The silence was broken, and the house that had been a tomb was now undeniably a home. The winter of 1816 was a season of waiting. The snows that blanketed Devon were deep and lasting, turning Lindworth Park into an island of white silence. But inside the house beat with a new, vigorous heart. Gabriel's solicitude bordered on the obsessive. He who had once locked himself away to avoid feeling anything, now found himself hyper-attuned to every shift in his wife's mood, every shadow under her eyes. He ordered the unpaved roads of the estate to be cleared daily, lest the physician be needed in an emergency. He had the draughty corridors lined with thick rugs to protect her from the chill. Dorothea found his anxiety both touching and occasionally stifling. I am with child, Gabriel, not made of glass, she told him one morning in the conservatory, where he was insisting she sit on a cushioned bench rather than stand at her easel. You are more precious than glass, he replied, his hand resting absently on the swell of her stomach, a gesture that had become his unconscious habit. Glass can be replaced. You cannot. I am healthy, she assured him, covering his hand with hers. And I am happy. The physician says I have the constitution of a dairymaid. The physician is a fool who smells of gin, Gabriel grumbled, though he sat beside her, his tension easing slightly. I am terrified, Dorothea. I look at you, growing with this life we made, and I remember. I remember how fragile happiness is, how easily it is snatched away. Not this time, she promised him. We are the hellebore, remember. We survive the winter. The child arrived with the spring equinox, during a gale that rattled the window panes of the West Wing. It was a long, arduous night. Gabriel spent it pacing the corridor outside the birthing room, a sentinel of despair, ignoring Mrs. Daventry's pleas for him to rest. Every cry from behind the door felt like a lash against his skin. He bargained with God, with fate, with the universe. Take the title, take the land, take everything, but let them live. When the silence finally fell, followed by the thin, indignant wail of a new life, Gabriel nearly collapsed against the wall. Mrs. Daventry opened the door, her face wreathed in smiles. "My lord, you may enter." Gabriel walked into the room as if entering a shrine. The air was heavy with the scent of lavender and iron. Dorothea lay against the pillows, hair plastered to her forehead, pale as the sheets, but her eyes were bright. In the crook of her arm lay a bundle of white linen. "Dorothea," he breathed, falling to his knees beside the bed. He did not look at the child. He looked only at her, devouring the sight of her chest rising and falling. "You are safe." "We are safe," she corrected, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Look, Gabriel. Look at your daughter." He looked down. A tiny face, red and crumpled, peered out from the blankets. A tuft of dark hair, exactly like his own, stood up on her head. "A girl," Gabriel said. "I am sorry," Dorothea began, a flash of the old insecurity crossing her face. "I know you needed an heir. I know the entail." "Hush," Gabriel interrupted fiercely. He reached out a trembling finger, and the baby's hand, impossibly small, curled around it. "Do not apologize, never apologize. She is perfect. She is Victoria." "Victoria?" "Victory," Gabriel murmured, tears spilling unchecked down his cheeks. "Because we have won, Dorothea. We have stolen life from the jaws of grief." The heir, Thomas, would follow 2 years later. A sturdy, loud boy who would secure the marquisate and ensure the Harcourt name continued. But it was Victoria, the child of the storm, who held her father's heart in her tiny fist from the moment she drew breath. As the nursery filled, so too did the reputation of Lindworth Park change. It was no longer the fortress of the mad Marquess. It became a beacon of a different sort. The circle, as Dorothea called it, expanded. It was not merely a school for maids. It evolved into a private botanical society for women of intellect who had been denied an outlet. They came from the village, then from Exeter, and eventually letters arrived from further afield. Gentlewomen who had heard whispers of the Marchioness's work petitioned to visit. They did not establish a formal academy, for that would have been too scandalous. Instead, they created a patronage circle. Under Gabriel's protection and Dorothea's guidance, these women catalogued the vast collection of Lindworth. They produced illustrations of such precision that when Gabriel sent them to the Royal Society in London, the learned men there assumed they were the work of a master draftsman. "Let them assume," Dorothea said with a smile, sealing a packet of drawings depicting the life cycle of the Orchis simia. "The work is what matters. The truth is in the ink." Gabriel, watching her from across his desk, shook his head in wonder. "You are subversive, my love. You are dismantling their prejudices one drawing at a time, and they do not even realize it." "I am merely gardening," she teased, "tending to minds instead of soil." 5 years later. December, 1820. The invitation cards were heavy, gilt-edged, and caused a sensation when they arrived on the breakfast trays of London's elite. "The Marquess and Marchioness of Lindworth request the honour of your presence at a Christmas ball at Lindworth Park." It was the first time the doors had been thrown open to society in nearly a decade. Curiosity was a powerful motivator. Refusals were almost non-existent. The Tun was desperate to see the recluse and his plain bride, to see if the rumours of their strange happiness were true or merely a facade hiding a Gothic horror. On the night of the ball, Lindworth Park blazed with light. Every window glowed against the dark December sky, casting golden rectangles onto the snow-covered lawns. Inside, the great hall was decked with boughs of holly, ivy, and garlands of exotic winter-blooming jasmine that filled the air with a heady, sweet scent. Musicians played in the gallery, the melody floating over the murmur of 300 guests. The ballroom, once shrouded in dust sheets, was now a sea of silk and velvet, jewels and uniforms. At the center of it all stood Dorothea. She was no longer the invisible girl in grey. Tonight, she wore a gown of deep emerald velvet that left her shoulders bare, the fabric skimming a figure that had softened and curved with motherhood. Around her neck glittered the Harcourt emeralds, a heavy, magnificent necklace that Gabriel had clasped there himself an hour before. But it was not the jewels that drew the eye. It was her presence. She stood with her hand resting lightly on Gabriel's arm, greeting guests with a calm, radiant confidence. She met the gaze of the highest sticklers of the ton without flinching. She was the Marchioness of Lindworth, the mistress of this domain, and she knew her worth. Beside her, Gabriel looked formidable, but the ice was gone from his eyes. He watched his wife with a pride so naked, so intense, that it made young ladies blush and matrons sigh with envy. The children were allowed to make a brief appearance before bed. Victoria, now 4 years old, possessed her mother's grey eyes and a solemn curiosity. She carried a small sketchbook and was seen showing a duke her drawing of a fern. Thomas, a chaotic whirlwind of 2, was held firmly in the arms of his nursemaid, though he reached out with chubby hands to grab at the shiny medals on the coats of passing officers. "Lady Lindworth," a voice drawled from behind them. A voice familiar enough to make Dorothea's spine stiffen, though the fear it once induced was long gone. Dorothea turned. Honoria stood there. 5 years had passed, and they had been hard years. The exile to Yorkshire had preserved the Montclair finances, but it had etched lines of bitterness around Honoria's mouth. She was still beautiful, but it was a sharp, brittle beauty, like a flower preserved in ice. She wore diamonds, but they looked cold against her skin. Beside her, Baron Montclair looked older, greyer and visibly nervous as he met Gabriel's gaze. They had not been invited for pleasure. They were here because Montclair needed Gabriel's support for a railway bill in the House of Lords, and he had forced his wife to brave the lion's den to secure it. "Lady Montclair," Dorothea said evenly. Her voice was warm, lacking any trace of sarcasm. "How kind of you to make the journey from the north. I trust the roads were passable? Your invitation insisted it would be a significant occasion," Honoria said, her eyes darting around the magnificent room, taking in the display of wealth and happiness with a hunger she could not conceal. "I see you have done well for yourself, sister. I suppose being nursemaid to a recluse has its rewards." The insult was habitual, a reflex, but it landed harmlessly against Dorothea's armor. "We have done well for each other," Gabriel corrected. His voice was calm, stripped of the anger he had once felt. He looked at Honoria not as an enemy, but as a pitiable creature. "My wife has transformed this house from a mausoleum into a home, and more than that, she has established a circle here at Lindworth Park, a sanctuary for the study of natural philosophy." "A circle?" Honoria raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "It sounds quaint. A sewing circle, I presume." "Botany and astronomy, actually," Dorothea corrected gently. "We have 12 students currently, young women of intellect who assist in cataloguing specimens for the scientific community. They do not sew, Honoria. They dissect. They observe. They contribute to the Royal Society." "How novel," Honoria sneered, though her voice wavered. "And I suppose you think this makes up for your lack of conventional accomplishments, that educating a handful of bluestockings excuses your own social failures?" "I do not consider myself a failure," Dorothea said simply. She looked around the room at the friends she had made, at the husband who adored her, at the children being carried up the stairs. "And neither does anyone whose opinion matters to me. These young women learn that their worth is inherent. It is found in their character and their minds, not dependent on the approbation of a ballroom or the cut of their gown." Honoria flinched. The words struck the exact center of her own insecurity. She looked at Dorothea, really looked at her, and saw the one thing she had never possessed: peace. Gabriel cleared his throat. He signaled to the musicians, and the music died away. The room fell silent, hundreds of faces turning towards the Marquess. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gabriel said, his voice carrying effortlessly to the back of the hall, "I thank you for joining us tonight. It has been many years since Lindworth Park saw such festivity. Too many years." He turned to look at Dorothea, and the intimacy of the moment felt almost private despite the crowd. "5 years ago," Gabriel continued, "I married believing I was entering into a practical arrangement. I was a man living in winter, expecting nothing but cold. I did not expect joy. I did not expect companionship, and I certainly did not expect the profound gift of being understood by another human being." He raised his glass. "But Dorothea has given me all of that and more. She has shown me that the greatest love often begins not in passion, but in quiet recognition, in seeing another person truly and choosing to honor what you see. She taught me that gardens need tending, hearts need opening, and that real worth is invisible to those who value only surface appearances." He lifted the glass higher. "To my wife, the woman who was offered to me as a joke, but who became my salvation. To the woman who taught me that sometimes the greatest revenge against cruelty is simply living so beautifully that the darkness cannot touch you. To Lady Lindworth," the crowd roared, the sound echoing off the rafters. Dorothea felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back, smiling at Gabriel with her whole heart. She drank the toast, feeling the warmth of the wine and the warmth of his love. Later, as the evening drew to a close and carriages began to line up on the drive, Honoria approached Dorothea one final time in the foyer. The crowd had thinned. "I suppose you are quite pleased with yourself," Honoria said in a low voice, meant only for her sister's ears. "You have turned my jest into a triumph. It galls me to admit it, but you have won." Dorothea studied her sister's face. She saw the lines of unhappiness, the exhaustion of maintaining a facade. "Honoria," Dorothea said softly, "I am not pleased with myself at your expense. I am simply pleased with my life, with the man I married, with the work I do, with the family we have built." "But I sent you here to be miserable," Honoria whispered, a confession wrung out of her. "I wanted you to fail." "I know," Dorothea said. She reached out and, for the first time in years, touched her sister's arm. "But your jest led me to the only man brave enough to look past what society said I should be and see what I actually am. You inadvertently gave me everything I ever wanted. Someone who matters. Someone who is seen." Honoria looked down at Dorothea's hand on her arm. She looked like she might cry or scream, but instead she simply nodded, a jerky, broken movement. "I wish you joy of it then," Honoria said, her voice cracking. "Thank you for the loan, Dorothea, for the debts. Go home to Yorkshire, Honoria," Dorothea said gently. "Plant a garden, read a book, stop looking in the mirror and look at the world. You might find you are happier than you think." Honoria pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders, turning away to hide her face. "Goodbye, sister." Gabriel appeared at Dorothea's side as the Montclair carriage rolled away into the night. He slid his arm around her waist, pulling her back into the warmth of the house. "Are you well?" he asked, searching her face. "I am perfectly well," she answered. "Better than well." "The children are awake," he confessed with a conspiratorial smile. "I promised Victoria I would show her how the crystal prism catches the candlelight in the conservatory before she slept. She refused to close her eyes until she saw the rainbows." "Then we must go," Dorothea agreed, leaning into his embrace. They walked together through the house that had become their sanctuary, away from the fading music of the ballroom and towards the west wing. They collected their children from the nursery, Thomas sleepy and heavy in Gabriel's arms, Victoria skipping ahead in her nightgown. They entered the conservatory. It was dim, lit only by the moonlight filtering through the glass and the candle Gabriel held. The air was thick with the scent of earth and sleeping flowers. Gabriel set the candle on the desk, the same desk where Dorothea had left her first timid note 5 years ago. He took the crystal prism from his pocket. "Watch," he whispered to his daughter. He held the crystal to the flame. Instantly, the room was fractured into beams of spectral light. Rainbows danced across the leaves of the palms, across the sleeping orchids, across the faces of his family. Victoria gasped, reaching out to catch the colored light in her hands. Gabriel looked over his daughter's head at his wife. The light played across Dorothea's face, illuminating the grey eyes that had seen him when he was invisible, the mouth that had spoken truth when he wanted silence. "Do you ever regret it?" Dorothea asked softly, watching the light dance. "Marrying me when you did not have to? When you could have had a diamond of the first water?" Gabriel shifted Thomas to his other shoulder so he could reach out and cup her cheek. "Not once," he said, the absolute certainty in his voice vibrating in the quiet air. "You taught me that the best things in life often come from unexpected places. That being overlooked is not the same as being unworthy. And that love, real enduring love, comes not from choosing someone who meets society's standards, but from seeing another person's true self and choosing to treasure what you find." He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss full of memory and promise, there among the plants his mother had loved and the children they had made together. "You were offered to me as a joke, my darling," he whispered against her lips. "But you became my greatest blessing, my truest companion, and the love I did not know I needed. How could I possibly regret that?" Dorothea smiled, and in that smile was the sum of all her journey from the frightened girl in the library to the woman standing in the center of her own world. She was not invisible. She was seen. She was loved. And the joke, in the end, was a story of joy. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this journey. If this story of resilience and love found in the most unexpected of places touched your heart, please remember to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that they too are worthy of being seen. Your support helps us continue creating stories of hope and redemption,